God, merciful and gracious, long-suffering and abundant in goodness and truth. Who is doing the proclamation? Is it God or is it Moses? Now, if the translation I have here on my Kindle says, Moses stood there with the Lord and proclaimed his name, Lord, thus the Lord passed before him and cried out, the Lord, and merciful and gracious God. Well, that's not really as clear as I thought it was either. Let me read that again. Moses stood there with the Lord and proclaimed his name, Lord. Thus the Lord passed before him and cried out. All right, so they seem to have Moses, the way this translation handles it, Moses stands there and proclaims his name, Lord. I guess that's the name he proclaims. Thus the Lord then passed before him and cried out, the Lord, merciful and gracious. So it seems to imply that Moses proclaims something and then God extends the revelation of who he is further. All right? That's an interesting concept. But whatever the case is, I mean, I don't know if we could easily resolve it right now during a devotional study. It'd be interesting to pull up all kinds of other commentaries right now, but I won't walk away from a live broadcast to go dig into my library. But it is a question I will give to you. Who's doing the proclamation here? Is it Moses or is it the Lord? All right. But let's look carefully. Let's go further here. And the Lord passed by before him and proclaimed, the Lord, God, merciful and gracious, long-suffering, abundant in goodness and truth. Now we could take apart the phrase, the Lord, all right? In the King James, Lord is capitalized, all right? So you should probably know what that means. The Lord, God, all right? We could look up the Hebrew word there for God. Probably Elohim, I believe. I could be wrong. The Lord, probably what we would say is Jehovah, okay, Yahweh. There's always debate on how to pronounce that. Kind of the covenant name of God, the self-existent one, the eternal one. Okay, I think we were, and I don't have the Hebrew in front of me. I'm going from memory. The Lord God, merciful and gracious, long-suffering and abundant in goodness and truth. All right, let's stop right here. Whenever we begin to see the biblical revelation of God, now I've already established that it's absolutely critical. That's where the beginning of knowledge flows from. Theology is the most important area of study because you have to get theology right before you can get anything else right. If you're wrong in theology, you're wrong about human nature, you're wrong about the world, you're wrong about everything. So you got to start, theology has to be right. All right. If theology is wrong, everything else is wrong. This is important because sometimes, especially ministries that critique the teaching of other people, and if they criticize people and their theology, a lot of times people will be like, well, you're being too harsh and not everyone agrees on theology. But let me make it clear. If someone's theology is wrong, if their understanding of God is wrong in any way, shape, or form, everything else they know indirectly is flawed because everything flows from a right understanding of God. I believe that's an absolute biblical principle and a theological truism that we all have to accept. Someone's theology has to be right. If it's wrong, everything else is flawed in some way, shape, or form. But here he reveals the kind of character of God that everyone likes. Merciful and gracious, long-suffering, and abundant in goodness and truth. Merciful and gracious, long-suffering and abundant in goodness and truth. That is a character of God that we all long for, that we all celebrate, right? Merciful, gracious, long-suffering, abundant in goodness and truth. Now, let's just stop right here. And I know you can hear the phone ringing in the background, but please note, it's not in this room. My previous live recordings, my previously live broadcast, the phone was in the same room. I obviously did not move it far enough from the room, but okay. All right, so let's look at this carefully. All right, the Lord God, merciful and gracious, long-suffering and abundant in goodness and truth. This is what I would challenge us about. Let's start this way. That is the character of the holy God. And that is the character that one reveals, our sinfulness and our failure to live up to that. We are not merciful and gracious and long-suffering and abundant in goodness and truth. Our very nature, our sinful nature, is one that is not necessarily merciful. We're definitely not gracious. We're definitely not long-suffering, and we're not abundant in goodness and truth. So the first thing, the character of God reveals how far we have fallen from that. Even though we're created in His image, there is much of His character that we do not demonstrate because we are sinners by nature. So on one hand, that is convicting to us. On the other hand, it is comforting. Because we are so flawed, it is good that our God is a God of mercy, a God who is gracious, a God who is long-suffering, a God who is abundant in goodness and truth, because I need those things, because even though I don't deserve them, I need a God who is merciful and gracious and long-suffering, because I fall short of his holy commandments on a daily basis. I can take comfort that the God, the creator of the universe, is merciful. He is gracious. I can take great comfort in that. But there's so number one, it convicts. Number two, it comforts. Number three, it's a challenge. What can I do today as a Christian to demonstrate the mercy of God, to demonstrate the graciousness of God? What can I do today to demonstrate the long-suffering of God? What can I do today to demonstrate the goodness and truth of God? I need to try. Now, we are not going to do it perfectly. We just got to start that from that. It's an impossibility for us to do this correctly. That's why we need Christ. But we should long to do this. And it's very difficult. Like, there's no 3-step plan going, hey, here's the way that you do this. But you need to be reminded every day, my God is merciful. He is gracious. He is long-suffering. He is abundant in goodness and truth. I want to reflect His character in my life. I'm going to fall short, but I would like to do that. They continue. Keeping mercy for thousands, forgiving iniquity and transgression and sin. Keeping mercy for thousands, forgiving iniquity and transgression and sin. All wonderful things. We need, as we have been forgiven, we need to forgive. Now, all of that, I think, is very clear. All right? Now, here is what I find interesting, and this is probably the crux of my devotional thinking this morning. Whenever we deal with the character of God and the attributes of God, we have to understand there's a complexity. There is a tension, right? Because God is perfect, He at the very same time can maintain two attributes that from a outsider perspective seem contradictory. They seem to be a tension between them. But God can maintain both in His perfection. Let me give you an example here. All of the attributes up to this point are about God's mercy, His goodness, Him forgiving. He keeps mercy for thousands, forgiving iniquity and transgression and sin. That a forgiving God, a loving God, a compassionate God, a long-suffering God. But look immediately as these attributes of God are being revealed in this text. Look what happens in verse 7, Exodus chapter 34, verse 7. Keeping mercy for thousands, forgiving iniquity and transgression and sin, and that will by no means clear the guilty, visiting the iniquity of the fathers upon the children, upon the children's children, unto the third and the fourth generation. Well, wait. I thought He was merciful. I thought He was long-suffering. I thought He forgave sin. And then all of a sudden you're like, wait, by no means will He clear the guilty. He will visit the iniquity of the fathers upon the children all the way up to the fourth generation. Well, wait. How can both be true? How can it be merciful, long-suffering, and forgiving, but at the same time, he will by no means clear the guilty, visiting the iniquity of the fathers upon the children and upon the children's children, upon the third and the fourth generation? Here is the complexity within God's character. At the same time that he is forgiving, at the same time that he is loving, he is also a God of holiness, of justice, and of wrath. And what happens is God can maintain these apparent contradictions to us, and our minds a contradiction. He can maintain them in his perfection. But here's the problem. When we try to reflect the character of God, which we should strive to do, we struggle with the balancing of them. We either slide over in love and forgiveness and mercy, but we don't want to deal with sin. Or we become so bothered by sin that all we want to do is proclaim wrath and condemnation, and we don't proclaim the forgiveness and the mercy and the long suffering. We have to embrace this struggle. We have to embrace this struggle. I almost want to start laughing, but I won't say. I was sitting here, and all of a sudden I felt something crawling on my neck. And well, it was, I don't know what it was. It was some kind of bug, and I almost started screaming hysterically. Okay, but now back to seriousness. That would have been a very embarrassing live broadcast, wouldn't it? Okay. But good thing. I had to say something because you could probably hear the change in my voice there because I almost started screaming. All right, I was like, what is that? All right, so back to this. What I want to do, and well, I'll use that as an illustration. Sometimes when we look at the opposite sides of God, there's almost a panic that can occur in us. We're like, wait a minute, he is loving. Wait, he won't forgive the guilty. He won't pardon the iniquity. He won't let the guilty go. I mean, he's just going to bring judgment upon them, and he's going to bring this all the way down to the fourth generation. Horrible. We almost want to have a negative reaction to it. And that's why I think the fear of the Lord is the beginning of the wisdom. The more we understand God and who he is and all of his attributes, there has to be a godly fear and reverence of going, whoa, we're dealing with something far beyond ourselves. You see, our character, our attributes, we contradict ourselves. We are a walking mess of contradiction, right? We are a walking mess of hypocrisy and failure. Because of our sinful nature, our character, our attributes are not consistent. We contradict ourselves, right? And I think this is a reality of our sinful nature. God's character in and of itself apparently has these opposing ideas that seem contradictory. I mean, when you read all these attributes about forgiving, and verse 7, he keeps mercy for thousands, forgiving iniquity, and that will by no means clear the guilty, visiting the iniquity of the fathers upon the children and upon the children's children, and third and to the fourth generation. We have to acknowledge, wait a minute, that seems contradictory, but it's not, because God can maintain both correctly. What we have to acknowledge is we read these attributes of God, we want to reflect those attributes of God, and we typically reflect them in an unbalanced way. We'll try to reflect God's mercy and love, and we may do it in a way that's not necessarily biblical. We want to reflect a stand against sin and against wrong, and we may handle it in an unbiblical way. And we have to acknowledge our imperfection in reflecting the character of God. And we have to discover that imbalance in ourselves. We have to see it, because we can't correct it. There's no hope of fixing it. And it's hard. It's hard to know how to handle this. You see this within Christians and churches all the time. They struggle desperately in what to do and how to handle themselves. They struggle here because sometimes the church you're like, wow, what are they doing? And they go so harsh after a sin, and you're like, why are you doing that? Where's the love? Where's the compassion? Where's the mercy? And then other times you'll see a church are like,